I'm Carlin Borisenko. In early 2020, I was the knitting Democrat who accidentally went viral on the internet for going to a Trump rally and then left the party. I became the conservative darling, was on all the shows, traveled around the country, and then realized that conservatives were no better than Democrats. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that both political tribes are two sides of the same coin. But it wasn't all bad. On my journey, I became obsessed with understanding the woke ideology and the culture war. I broke the story of the city of Seattle doing segregated training with its employees.
How bad has this stuff become? The city of Seattle has now put out, I'm not kidding you, this is according to Dr. Carolyn Borisenko, who's an organizational psychologist. The city of Seattle asked its white employees to voluntarily spend a day off in a training about their internalized racial superiority.
I broke the story that led to the first ever federal lawsuit against critical race theory in the schools. I broke the Coke Be Less White story, one of the biggest anti-woke stories of all time. It got over 30 million views. Coca-Cola's corporate headquarters even had to change their outgoing voicemail.
Throughout the past few days, you may have seen inaccurate reporting on the content of our recently launched diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
I exposed the schools in Burlington, Vermont for grooming middle school children live on the internet. They called me an unwoke cult leader for that. And the Vermont Human Rights Commission slandered me publicly as being a hate channel. I even got called a hero in Breitbart for exposing that the Washington Post was writing a hit piece on Christopher Rufo. I have broken story after story after story about what's going on in the public schools, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to autistic sex education, to the Department of Education in Michigan, literally training teachers all over the state how to groom children. I wrote a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I host a podcast all about fighting back, and I'm downloading all of my knowledge to you on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. The world is a crazy place. We are literally surrounded by cults on all sides. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of the culture war, and I will show you the dark, dystopian underbellies on both sides. Here are the commitments I'll make to you. I will always tell you the truth. I will always bring you receipts. And if you stick with me, I promise you will see the world differently. Welcome to the cult. Please mount that like button for me and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Well, everyone. Happy Friday. We did it. We made it through another week. And you guys know what that means. It's time for Happy Hour. Happy Hour is a stream that we do on Fridays every 5 p.m. Every Friday at 5 p.m. There we go. On my YouTube, Rockfin, Odyssey, and Rumble channel, where we do the very hard emotional labor of watching a woke training from start to finish. We watch the boring bits. We watch the cringy bits. And because we sit here every single week for over almost 3 years now, going on 2.5 years, we know more about what the woke left is doing in the real world than pretty much anyone else on the internet. We know more than the pundits. We know more than the commentators. We know more than the journalists. We know more than the so-called experts, because we are the ones who actually sit and watch their full trainings. We don't watch clips cut out of context. We don't watch outlandish things on TikTok that aren't even real, that are just made to get likes and views on the internet. We watch the real trainings in the classroom, in the workplace, that they're doing in the real world. And trust me, when you watch the real stuff, although it may be boring sometimes, you will be even more terrified than anything you will see on libs of TikTok, because these are the things that are being taught to your kids. These are the things that you are being trained on in the workplace. These are the things that are being taught at the universities. And this is why the people in my community that come to Happy Hour on a regular basis, I really believe this, are a full 2 years ahead of where everyone else is. It's not even close. We are living in a completely different world than most of the conservative influencers, and that's because we do the work to make sure we know what's going on. And starting with some Twitter news from Murphy's Pool, FYI, both my X accounts got instantly nuked after I followed Jake Angeli today, so I'm not ignoring anyone. Isn't that interesting, Murphy's Pool? Isn't that interesting that your sock accounts that you definitely don't have because they banned you on your other accounts, they and your sock accounts have been working for a while. They got banned as soon as you followed the QAnon shaman. Huh. All right, Twitter. All right. Thank you for the update, Murphy's Pool. I'm sure you will be back in business in no time. Thank you to Beth, too. Hello, fearless leader. I meditated with the like button and it astro projected all over the place. Beth, I love that. I love it. See, we've got Beth, our committed conservative Christian, embracing the woo, embracing meditation, embracing astral projection. You know what? I'm living for it. Like, this is what I love about my community is I genuinely do think that I have one of the most diverse communities of like any content creator on the internet because I don't pander to either tribe. And so all of the disaffected weirdos come and find me at some point. We're like the bad news bears of the internet, but it works out. Thank you, Beth. I do appreciate it. Well, guys, today for happy hour, we are going to be tackling either my favorite or least favorite topic. It is a topic we don't cover often on happy hour because, to be quite frank, these presentations are actually really difficult to find. You don't find, like, I can find a critical race theory presentation like instantly. Queer studies, don't forget about it. I can like find a good queer studies presentation in like 2.5 minutes. It takes a little bit longer to find a fat studies presentation. It's not that they're not done, but usually they don't actually put the official trainings and the official presentations around fat studies on the internet. And so it's just more difficult for us to find them. But I found you one. I did. We haven't done fat studies for a while. And today we are going to jump into the deep end of the fat studies pool. We are going, well, about an hour south of me to Tufts University. Now, I know it says Illinois State University on the slide. Don't pay attention to that because the YouTube channel that I've gotten this off of is the Tufts University. Hang on, we will let it load here. The Tufts University Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy. So this is not just any fat studies presentation. This is an official fat studies and fat anti-bias training that was conducted at Tufts University in their School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy, but 4 months ago. 4 months ago. So this is relatively recent. And if you guys like wondering why like I think that Tufts is so significant, let me show you some other stuff that I found out about Tufts recently. I actually I reported on this story back in May. Tufts University right now is doing a study where they're studying non-binary 3-year-olds. And I kind of think that the reason they're doing this is to try to reverse engineer how best to groom children. If you read the study, it kind of feels like that's the best use of this study. So that's something that Tufts has done recently, but that's not the only thing that Tufts has done recently. The same people who are conducting that study of the non-binary 3-year-olds are also working on opening a groomer middle school exclusively for trans and non-binary kids. Same people. The same professor at Tufts University that's doing that non-binary 3-year-old study is helping them open a groomer middle school in New York City. Should be open anytime now. They were targeting being open for the fall. We may have to do an update on that at some point. But that is the kind of stuff that you find coming out of Tufts University. And so today we are going to watch an official presentation that was conducted at Tufts University and exists on their YouTube channel today called Weight Bias and Fat Stigma. In my presentation, I will discuss how ample body weight has been pathologized and medicalized, leading to the reinforcement of anti-fat attitudes and fat stigma in American society. I will highlight how fat identity has been overdetermined by stigma and how as fat prejudice grew, this resurfaced long-standing anti-black and anti-brown prejudices through engaging with critical fat studies scholarship. Yes, that's a real thing. I will offer a counter discourse to mainline public health models and will provide insight into the consequences of fat prejudice. Fat study scholars are aware that many researchers claiming to study weight stigma do not recognize fatness as simply a form of bodily variation or human diversity. Instead, they think weight stigma is counterproductive to encouraging fat people to lose weight through diet and exercise. This is why we're not allowed to talk about going to the gym anymore online. If you're seeing these articles about how the right wing is so obsessed with going to the gym, thank you, fat studies, because you're not supposed to be allowed to talk about going to the gym because you might make fat people feel bad about the fact that they're not going to the gym. And that all comes from critical fat studies. Thank you, Tufts. We must work to demonstrate how weight stigma can have negative impacts on fat people's rights. Unfortunately, very few places in the US and abroad have codified laws to protect fat people from discrimination. Rather than distinguish direct forms of fat discrimination, legal definitions of weight discrimination often consider it a form of indirect discrimination. It is essential that we work to articulate the logics of anti-fat discrimination to protect fat people from harm. People should have the right to live in diverse bodies, including body shape and size, without fear of negative judgment or discrimination. Unfortunately, fat people are often treated as second-class citizens and face weight discrimination and anti-fat sizeism. To create a more accepting society, it is important to promote size acceptance and take issues of anti-fat bias seriously. Furthermore, the goal of fat studies and fat activism go well beyond anti-stigma work, as these fields benefit from their multi-faceted nature. And I have to read you the bio of the guy that we're hearing present today. I just have to. Jason, who is a PhD and an associate professor with a joint appointment in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program. Let's just remember that. Jason is not only in the Sociology and Anthropology department at Illinois State University, he's also in the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program. Let's come back to that in a second. He teaches and researches LGBTQIA+ studies and queer theory. Oh, queer theory, hello. Fat studies, sociological approaches to critical race studies, gender and sexuality studies, visual culture, and sociology of the body. He uses the theoretical paradigm of intersectionality in conducting qualitative research to examine marginality and privilege in social groups. He has authored Fat Gay Men, Girth, Mirth, and the Politics of Stigma, co-edited a journal issue on fat activism, published in journals and anthologies, and appeared on Good Morning America, The Takeaway, BBC's Radio 4 Thinking Out Loud, and is a longtime member of the Racial Democracy, Crime, and Justice Network. And this guy is from Illinois State University. And the reason that I highlighted that he's in the Women's Gender and Sexuality program, and this is just a pro tip, I'm going to recommend, if you guys want to Google this guy, you can. But here's the thing. Every single fat studies scholar that I have ever come across, every single one, I'm not exaggerating this, every single one of them is also an amateur porn star. Every single one. Because I used to make a mistake when we were watching fat studies. I used to make the mistake of looking into the people who were teaching fat studies and finding their Instagrams and finding their web pages and finding their social media. And inevitably, when I found their social media, you go down a rabbit hole with all the different sites that they're on. And inevitably, and I swear this is true, you end up on Pornhub. They're all amateur porn stars. I don't know what it is, the connection between fat studies and amateur porn stars, but I have seen things that I cannot unsee. I still have images scarred into my brain of accidentally clicking on a Pornhub link, and I just couldn't stop watching because it was one of those things. It's like an accident. You can't turn away. They are all amateur porn stars. I don't know what the connection is. Yes, it is definitely a fetish of some sort. So I just think it's an interesting coincidence that the same associate professor of sociology and anthropology at Illinois State University that's presenting this fat studies presentation, I just think it's an interesting coincidence that he is also a professor in the women's gender and sexuality studies program. It's weird. I don't understand why. I'm just warning all of you that if you Google these people, you will inevitably end up on Pornhub and you will inevitably see things that you cannot unsee later. All right? So that's what we're watching today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a drink or two next to you, because I think we're going to need some alcohol today. I think so. But before we get into that, I just want to let you guys know just a couple of orders of housekeeping. Number one, please do make sure you mount that like button for me, or you can caress the like button, pet the like button. You can shake hands with the like button. You can do whatever you want to the like button, but please do something to it. Don't leave the like button hanging, okay? Mounting the like button lets YouTube know to recommend this stream to other people, which brings more friends here to be traumatized with us as we make our way through fat studies. But the other thing you want to do is make sure you are subscribed to my primary Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. This is my content hub on the internet. This is where you will get all my best content. You can, of course, subscribe for free. But if you want to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business, because I am 100% funded by you, please make sure you sign up for a monthly or annual membership. It is $8 a month or $80 a year. That gets you access to all of my premium content. That gets you access to the 2 Zoom calls I do with my supporters every single week on Mondays and Wednesdays. It gets you access to my supporter Discord, where we are doing movie night on Sunday. And this Sunday, in honor of Sin, because it was Sin's birthday, we are watching a movie that Sin has selected, which is The Princess Bride. We're doing that on Sunday at 8 p.m. We do movie night every Sunday at 8 p.m. So if you're not in a Princess Bride type of mood, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want to come and celebrate Sin's birthday, because Sin is the matriarch of our community. Like, we must protect Sin at all costs. But just in case you don't want to watch The Princess Bride, we do different movies every single Sunday night in the Discord. And so definitely sign up for a membership. You can come and join us. You can also sign up on my locals, my Patreon, become a member of this here YouTube channel, whatever works best for you. But I would recommend my Substack if you had to choose, because I just think that that's the place that I would like people to sign up. And if you didn't see it, I did have a chat with the QAnon shaman, Jake Angeli, yesterday. It was a wonderful chat. And we have a clip up on both the YouTube channel and in my Substack now about his honestly really, really, really good advice about how to red pill your friends and family. I found Jake to be just so lovely and thoughtful, and just like, he was everything I hoped he would be. And I do hope he comes back on the channel again at some point in the future, because he was just a wonderful guest, gave us lots of insight, lots of information. But I thought his comments about how to red pill your family were just particularly good. And so I made a clip of those. You can find it on the YouTube channel. You can find it in the Substack, and make sure you're signed up over there. The other thing I want to let you guys know is, of course, we did get our Trump mugshot yesterday. And so in the Unwoke Art store, which is unwokeart.com, you can find the link in the description below. I do, of course, have some Trump merch. Well, actually, no, let's not look at the t-shirt. Let's not look at the t-shirt. Let's look at the mug. We're talking about a mugshot here. And so, of course, I put it on a mug. Now, I wanted to take a little bit of a different tack with this, because I knew that everyone was going to be making t-shirts with Trump in black and white and looking ominous, and it does look really badass, and I almost made one of those. And I was like, no, Carlin, no, you have to do better. We need a message with this t-shirt. And I oftentimes think that the very best designs that I do for the Unwoke Art Store, the very best ones are the ones where you don't know which side I'm on. Autumn is already getting a timeout today. Autumn, you fuck with my merch again, you're going to get banned. And I'm not joking around, Autumn. I'm not messing around with this. Autumn keeps ragging on the picture. The picture is a high quality print. Autumn is running around trying to sabotage my merch. Autumn is our pet socialist, for those who don't know. She's trying to sabotage my merch by telling everyone this picture is too small. It's not. It's a high-res print, Autumn. Relax. Anyway, I wanted to take a different tact with the Trump mugshot merch, because I like it when people don't know what side I'm on. And so not only did I put this fancy gold frame around the Trump mugshot, because, he's Trump, man. Trump is high class. He loves gold. And so we're going to have a lot of gold around it. But I also put the resist fascism hashtag, because Who's the real fascist? Is Trump the fascist? Are the people persecuting Trump the fascist? Really, you could read this merch in any number of different ways, and I think it keeps people guessing, and I like that. I've already had some Trump supporters yelling at me for this merch. They're like, "You don't know what fascism is," and blah, 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 blah. Like I love it when I trick conservatives into believing that I'm like a raging leftist because they just don't think about these things sometimes before they speak. And so this is one of those great things, guys, because this is some Trump merch that you're going to be able to wear in the wild, and leftists won't know if you're on their team or not. So it's not like a MAGA hat. If you wear a MAGA hat, they're going to know you're on Trump's team. But if you wear this, they're not going to know if you're on their team or if you're on the other side. So I think it's fun. I had a great time doing it. I've got the Trump mugshot merch in the store right now. You can, of course, get it on a mug. You can get it on a t-shirt. I'm trying out this here tumbler with a straw. I think this tumbler looks pretty great. And then I put it on a hoodie as well. And so that is my contribution to the epic amount of Trump mugshot merch that has come out in the last 24 hours or so. Of course, we do also have the limited edition Trump Indictment Victory Tour t-shirt that is still available with every single Trump indictment printed on the back. Lots of other great stuff in the Unwoke Art store as well. You can find that at unwokeart.com. All right, guys, we have one more order of business, and that is, of course, I need a beer. And in happy hour tradition, you guys on YouTube anyway get to vote for what beer I drink first. So I go to the beer store, I get 4 beers, and then you guys get to vote. Let me grab them out of my little cooler. Bing. I was really hoping for some peanut butter beers today, honestly, or not peanut butter, pumpkin, but they didn't really have a good selection of pumpkin beers at the beer store I go to for some reason. I don't really know why. So we're going back to our fruity sours again. So let's see our first one. And honestly, I only got this one because I think the can is so sexy. I love the can. It's so like, come on. And this is going to be, I think, a raspberry sour. And this is from Atrios Brewing Company. And that's really all I have on it because it doesn't have anything on the bottle, but it's a raspberry sour. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is going to be a blackberry fluffernutter sour, and this is from our old standby, which is Branch Blade Brewing Company. And again, this one doesn't really have a description except that it has blackberry and it has fluffernutter. So a blackberry fluffernutter sandwich essentially in a beer. How great is that? That's option number 2. And then we're getting into some heavy ones. You guys are going to like these. So do you guys remember last week when I had that banana smoothie beer? So the same company that does the banana smoothie beers, they do a whole bunch of other types of beer as well, and I have a couple of them. This is Out of Order Brewing. Hunter Biden's Coke Stash. Where is the mug available? The mug is available. Hang on. The mug is available at unwokeart.com, bud. There, the link is in the chat. It's also in the description below. All right. So we've got 2 beers from Out of Order Brewing, and these are some beefy beers. These are going to be smoothie style beers. So really, I mean, is it really a beer? Is it really a smoothie? Who's to say, really? This one is called You Got This Sug, and it is brewed with copious amounts of watermelon, strawberry, beignets, pastry cream, and lactose. So this is going to be our watermelon beignet beer. Beignets in a beer. Like, come on. Like, can you, geez, what a time to be alive. And then our last one, and this one is called Kissy Kissy, and it's got Miss Piggy on it. And I might be most excited about this one, if I'm honest, because this one is brewed with copious amounts of strawberry, lemon lime, cotton candy, vanilla ice cream, and lactose. So check that out. Strawberry, lemon lime, cotton candy, vanilla ice cream, and lactose. So that's going to be another great beer there. So those are our options, guys. I'm going to put the poll in the chat on YouTube. And again, we have our options as the raspberry sour sexy beer. We have our blackberry fluffernutter. We have our watermelon beignet. and we have strawberry, vanilla ice cream, cotton candy. Make your selections, guys, and while you do, I'm going to set up the presentation today for the sound so we can all get our fat studies on. I mean, I had to get like dessert beers because we're watching a fat studies presentation. Obviously. There we go. Let me see. Oh God, this is like not even close. You guys are voting for the strawberry vanilla ice cream one. Okay, hang on. John Morgan says the only option is Fluffernutter. No, John. No, that's not the only option. No. Exactly, Touge. Touge is in the spirit of the Miss Piggy does seem appropriate for the Fat Studies presentation. That's awful. We're awful people. You guys all know that, right? We're like awful people. Well, good thing that 53% of people in the chat agreed with Touge. Because we are drinking the Miss Piggy beer. Okay, let me pour this. I have a feeling this is going to be a fun one to pour, so I'm going to show you guys. And if you guys are drinking something fun today, let us know in the chat. Oh, shit. Ah! This looks like melted strawberry ice cream. It started to bubble up. Yes, Touge says, hang on, Touge says, we've already failed that it hasn't even started yet. Oh, God. Vince gave into the stereotype and voted for watermelon. Way to go, Vince. Mutilated says we are all fat phobic. It's probably true. Beth says, don't forget to have some sort of personal relations with that, like personal relations, Beth. I like that. Have intimate time, have private time with the like button. Thank you, Beth. Can we vote for a whiskey? Only if it's peanut butter whiskey, Murphy's Pool. Screwball is the only whiskey I will drink. All right, let me show you guys this. It looks like melted strawberry ice cream. That's what it looks like. This is a beer. Can we all just appreciate this is a beer that looks like a strawberry fucking ice cream. Cheers, everyone. Happy Friday. It tastes like a strawberry ice cream too. That is delicious. This is the best one yet. Kissy Kissy from Out of Order Brewery. I salute you. And it's 6% alcohol. This legitimately tastes like melted strawberry ice cream, and it is 6% alcohol. I love God Bless America. All right, guys, we are watching Weight Bias and Fat Stigma from Tufts University School of Nutrition Sciences. Someone pray a rosary or something. Let's get this party started.
Your ability to be able to talk quantitative and qualitative, like, it's really critical.
Oh, so this is your fault, Murphy's Pool. So even though Jason is from Illinois State University, so the guy Murphy's Pool, if you've ever donated to Illinois State, you have funded the guy that we are going to be watching today, but he is presenting at Tufts. Thank you, Murphy's Pool.
Thank you. Oh, hi, Aaron.
Sorry.
Nice to meet you.
A colleague of Jintaz at the Freedom School. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Aaron and me, we co-host the speaker series here, the seminar. We usually have so our seminar is every Wednesday at noon time. So most of the audience are our students, like all the master and PhD.
Thank you, Hunter Biden's Coke stash.
School. And sometimes our alumni also join the call either via Zoom. I forgot if they can also join through the streamline like the other tools, but they can always ask questions.
Yeah. Zoom seems to open up the possibility for people to attend.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the thing is, if they join online through other tools or live streams, the numbers are not shown here. but
Okay.
they may still can ask questions, and we have a person collect the questions from the live Zoom, so
Okay.
if there are questions.
Sounds good.
I see people start to join in. Let's just wait 1-2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, like we can
Oh,
start.
so we're waiting for them to do housekeeping,
Sounds good.
apparently.
Joining us. So it's great to have you. And I know there's been a lot of interest in your talk. So yeah, really excited to see to learn more on the topic.
Thank you. Yeah, I've never tried it, so this is a new talk I wrote, so we'll see how it goes.
You know, Beth is talking about like how she was fat shamed growing up in the chat, and I want to say this, like I wish there was a balance to this, because I'm gonna be honest, I'm fat shamed every day on the internet. Like, people call me fat and ugly on the internet every day, and most of them are conservatives, and most of them are pretending to be good conservative Christians, and it's like, I wish they could find a healthy balance. I wish there could be a healthy balance between fat shaming and like this fat acceptance thing that's going on, because if I'm around people on the left, I actually feel much more comfortable, because people on the left don't attack you for your looks. People on the left don't shit on you because of your weight. People on the right do that, people on the left don't. And then people in the middle just tend not to care either way. But like, I find it to be really off-putting that every single time I say something that someone on the right doesn't like, the very first thing they do is call me fat. And it's just like, bro, do you have, like, first of all, if you're resorting to calling someone fat, like, you have no real argument. I hope people realize that. Like, if the only thing you have is to call someone fat, you have no real argument, and you aren't capable of actually having an intelligent conversation. But on the other side, like, I also don't think this fat acceptance slash amateur porn star thing is good either. So can we just get in the middle, where like, I mean, I don't mean to be a bitch, but like, my weight is no one's fucking business except for me, and possibly my husband could have some input as well, or like people that I actually know in real life, like close friends could say like, "Carol, have you been to the gym lately? I probably should go back to the gym." This is like, you don't take advice about your weight from people who don't love you. Like, I mean, genuinely love you. So, like, can we just stop with the way, like, we have so many bigger problems in the world than attacking people because of their weight, because you don't like what they have to say. It's ridiculous. And like, every single time it happens, I'll tell you what, when I was on the left, this was one of my biggest turnoffs about the right. It was like they were attacking everyone about their looks all the time. It's like, do you think I want to be part of your club? You're just going to rag on me all the time. Like, no, thank you.
You're my guinea
That's
pigs.
great. Yeah, exactly. What's hard is on Zoom, it's hard to get honest reactions. Like, if you're looking at people's faces, you can tell something didn't land.
Right.
Or people, or people got bored.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Yeah. Early on in the days after I wrote my book, I remember doing talks, but they were all in person. I was roaming around the US giving talks in person. And then you can really tell.
What was the name of your book, if I'm gonna ask?
Oh, it's called Fat Gay Men, Girth, Mirth, and the Politics of Stigma. No, I'll put up a picture of it. Just, I won't talk about it today, but I'll just give a little brief shout out to it.
Yeah, and Dr. Solomon, you can see the book name from the flyer we sent out about like 2 days ago, maybe last week. Okay, let's start.
Okay.
Welcome everyone. Let's
That's
start
funny.
Today's
Welcome
seminar.
back, Gravity Goods.
Just before we officially start, just let you know, next week will be spring break, and after the spring break, the Wednesday speaker will be in person. So we will.
Hang on, got a super chat from Queen Beth of the chat. I think telling obese people they're healthy is worse, though. They will end up paying for it later in life. I know from experience. I mean, I think that that's bad too. But the people who are telling, like, Here's the thing. It's like there's a difference between like a doctor telling an obese person they're healthy or a loved one telling an obese person they're healthy and like a random stranger, right? Or unhealthy too. Like there's a big difference between like a doctor telling you you're unhealthy and like some random asshole on the internet telling you you're unhealthy, or a loved one telling you you're unhealthy and a random asshole on the internet telling you you're unhealthy. It's just like I like, so I agree, Beth. I don't think that people should be giving out incorrect information. I also just don't think it's anyone's business unless you are like a medical professional, or if you are actually in some sort of like intimate relationship with the person. Otherwise keep your opinions to yourself. Ain't none of your business. You don't have to see, like, if you are not in a position to have to see someone naked, then it is none of your effing business.
We'll have you come, I wish you can come to the auditorium and the speaker will be there. And that's a short announcement. So for today, again, like we don't have a lot of rules like usual. Like you can, hopefully you can keep your questions at the end. We have a Q&A session. You can ask questions. So for today, we have pleasure to have Dr. Jason Wetzel to present his work. And Dr. Wetzel is an associate professor with a joint
Gabs is turning into a libertarian.
with a joint appointment in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at Illinois State University. And he has been teaching and do the research, in the LGBTQIA+ studies and for the FAT study and the sociological approach to critical race studies and other visual culture and sociology of body. So certainly he will talk about those aspects. And he has been using the theoretical paradigms of the intersectionality in conducting qualitative research to examine the marginality and the privilege in social groups. And he has published books in journals and many papers in journals and anthologies. And he also has been appeared on the TV shows and some like Good Morning American, and of course you know that, and BBC radios. And he is also a longtime member of the Racial Democracy and Crime and Justice Network. So without further delay, I will give the podium to Dr. Wetzel, looking forward to a very nice talk today. Go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me today to speak on weight bias and fat stigma. So everyone already knows the fat is unhealthy model. Informed by healthist and neoliberal logics, it goes without saying that the thin-centric system was not designed to support fat people. Rather, it would prefer they did not exist. Fat people are only valuable to the extent that they serve as a revenue stream for the weight loss industry. In this presentation, my position is fat people are not the problem, fat stigma and weight bias are. If we truly cared about the quality of fat people's lives, then we would address the shabby treatment they face in the workplace, healthcare, social life, and the public sphere, and the reasons behind that treatment. I'll share with you a counter discourse to mainline public health models by engaging with critical fat studies, scholarship, as well as with fat activist perspectives. Most of us in the US have been conditioned to believe that fat is detrimental to one's health. Some narratives divide fat people into two camps, arguing a difference in—
Can we just take a moment to just consider the reality that this guy literally made up a profession? Made it up. There are so many people in the world that, they want to do things, they have passions, they have, things they want to pursue, but they're afraid but they don't pursue what they want to pursue because they're afraid that they won't be able to make money, and they want to have a more practical profession and things like that. Like, I know when I went to college, like way long time ago now, I picked my major because like I wanted to study religion. I wanted to study like a more like liberal arts sort of thing because that's what I was really into at the time. And and I ended up picking communications because I was like, you know what, a communications degree is like way more practical than like religious studies or theology or anything like that. And so I was like, I'm going to do the practical thing. Then I took like some, you know, philosophical courses and stuff like that like on the side and whatever. But when I see things like this where I'm like, this guy has literally made up a profession. This is not a real thing. Critical fat studies is not real. It is something that someone invented. It is not a necessity for society. It is not something that contributes anything to the greater knowledge base. It pretends that fat is an immutable characteristic when it's not. He made it up. And so I point that out because I want you to know that whatever you want to do in the world, you are perfectly capable of doing whatever you want. Don't put restrictions on yourself because people like this don't put restrictions on themselves, and then they invent things like critical fat studies, and then all of a sudden people start to believe it's real because they say it over and over and over again. You can be anything you want to be, guy. The sky is the limit.
Value between, quote, healthy fat people and unhealthy fat people, with the latter being viewed as not deserving of rights or state support due to the amount of health care they may require.
Exactly, James Jones.
This tight coupling of fat with ill health has been reinforced by the diet industrial complex. In the late 2000s, many scientific reports contending fatness should be labeled with disease status were funded by those with financial interest in making this the dominant narrative. In 2008, Dr. David Allison and his team, who defined obesity as a disease, acknowledged that they had, quote, accepted funds from multiple food, pharmaceutical, and other companies with interests in obesity. And in 2009, the New York Times uncovered many articles in medical journals that had been written by undisclosed ghostwriters with questionable financial ties. The weight loss industry feeds off fat anxiety and made fatness the center of a moral panic. The obesity as disease narrative was underwritten by diet food and product manufacturers, weight loss drug and surgery companies. These stakeholders launched well-funded advertising campaigns, overriding the potential risks of diet pills and surgery to line its coffers. Eliminating fatness led to a new form of eugenics focused on erasing fat people and making everyone thinner. Public health campaigns were designed to manage, cure, and eliminate fat as unfit, both physically and morally, with an urgent imperative for people to lose weight. Returning to Dr. Allison, a decade after his labeling of obesity as a diseased state of being, in 2018,
it is a disease.
he was interviewed.
Hang on. And the QAnon shaman hit on this yesterday on the stream. He said disease comes from dis-ease. Dis-ease. Disease. So yes, being like overweight does put your body in a state of dis-ease. I know we don't want to talk about that, but that's just the reality.
By the American Society for Nutrition. In the interview, he tells on himself, admitting, quote, the childhood obesity intervention literature seems to be particularly susceptible to distortion. This has to do with feelings of zealousness, the idea that childhood obesity is such a problem and it must be addressed. Indeed, anti-obesity zealots have invented a global health crisis to frame fatness as a pathological condition of epidemic proportions. A case in point, in 2005, the CDC called into question the validity of the US annual death statistics attributed to obesity. The CDC disputed the stated 300,000 figure and estimated deaths linked to obesity at 112,000 per year. It also indicated that being moderately overweight was even linked with longevity. However, Stubborn outcry by anti-fat mongers against the CDC study led to the center's backpedaling to appease the obesity epidemic narrative without any counter data as to why they withdrew their opinion. This speaks to knowledge production, relying on institutional support, wherein certain forms of knowledge are undone or abandoned if they undermine existing ideologies and power interests. Unlike traditional approaches to body shape, size, and weight, those who take a fat studies approach ask, why do we oppress people of size, and who benefits from that oppression? The vast network of fat studies scholars and activists challenge conventional understandings about the fat body and fat people. They offer a counterpublic in which to share fat-positive ideas. They promote a more radical view of fat not being the four-letter dirty word that the sizes society has made it out to be. Fat activists and fat studies scholars reframe high weight as a form of bodily diversity. Fat activists aim to reconfigure the larger system of which...
Wait. Look at the bottom bullet point, and then look at the author of the paper. You can't make this stuff up. Health at Every Size is written by Bacon et al. That's gotta be a troll. It's gotta, that can't be real.
which they are a part of, and change the premise on which the system is built. They promote self-acceptance and call for a change in a fat-phobic society, especially in a fat person's own outlook. Fat activists counter dominant beliefs about how people of size ought to act. Samantha Murray explains that as she tried to embrace fat activism as originally prescribed, she felt ambiguous about living her fat body. She writes that the ways in which she lives her fat body are always multiple, contradictory, and eminently ambiguous. Likewise, in my book, I liken today's fat activists and scholars to engaging in category work that reconfigures the shame of fat stigma by differentiating myriad fat selves from these hackneyed essentialist stereotypes. In critiquing the medical model, fat studies scholars and fat activists, they reject the imperative of regarding fat as a defect to be eradicated. They understand obesity and the problematic and reductive measure of the body mass index as oppressive terms, and they prefer to simply use the descriptive term fat. Fat-positive scholars and activists also highlight historical and cross-cultural variation in attitudes towards fatness, and they sometimes promote health at every size to replace weight and size-based paradigms promoted by public health policy. The health at every size concept supports eating intuitively in response to internal cues of hunger, satiety.
That's like a really bad idea. It is a really bad idea to tell a fat person to eat intuitively, especially if that fat person is addicted to sugar, because then all that person's going to create. Has anyone ever tried to give up sugar? Because listen, man, like I wouldn't I'm not addicted to sugar. Like I think I was at one point. I'm not addicted to it now. But like there are a couple things I've been addicted to in my life. Coffee is one of them. I am never giving up coffee. It is never going to happen. But man, when I tried to get like I was eating a lot of sugar at one point in my life. And when I was like, okay, you need to cut down on the effing sugar, Carlin. Giving up a sugar addiction is like the hardest effing thing in the world. Every part of your body is going to be like, eat that fucking brownie now. I don't even like brownies. I was like, eat the fucking brownie, eat the cookie, eat the, like, every part of your being is going to go for every single, like, if you tell someone who's addicted to sugar to eat intuitively, like, watch the F out. Yes, Judy. Judy says she's addicted to salt. Yo, I feel like I transferred my sugar addiction to a salt addiction, which probably isn't any healthier, but salt is so good. Oh my God. Do you know what the best salt is? Black truffle salt. There's a specialty salt store in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. They sell black truffle salt, and it is like the best effing salt you've ever had in your life. Oh my God. So good. I don't know if it's better than sugar, but it's different, I guess.
And appetite, rather than falling prey to yo-yo diets or risky weight loss surgeries. Just a little bit about my own research before getting to the heart of the matter.
Look at that social
My
justice
critically
cover
acclaimed
book.
book, Fat
Critically
Gay Men,
acclaimed.
Girth, Mirth, and the Politics of
Critically
Stigma
acclaimed.
grew
By
out of my
who?
dissertation and was published by NYU Press in 2014, ultimately launching my scholarly career. When I conceived of this project, I was witnessing a gay scene with both subtle and overt fat shaming and negative body talk. So I selected as my ethnographic research site the Girth and Mirth gay male social movement, which places sizeism as a central social problem in the gay community that must be addressed. So in reaction to gay fat phobia and to being ostracized, Girth and Mirth developed in the 1970s as an international social club for big gay men and their relatively few admirers. Doubly stigmatized both by body size and sexual orientation, these big gay men exhibit creative responses to sizeism, which I refer to as fat performative protest. Rather than capitulating to the shame of fat stigma in everyday life, they playfully disregard it, transgressing the rules of bodily conduct to experience the very same pleasures that others may blithely assume. Thus, the fat gay male body
So
is
they
not
had
just a
sex?
side of shame, but also a side of stigma resistance or
They had-
embodied resistance.
These guys are like, we had sex and it was a form of resistance. Congratulations, fat gay men. You can have sex too.
That said, I'll launch into the fundamentals of my presentation by first discussing the terminology used around body weight and size and why word choice matters. So fat activists and fat studies scholars understand the F word, meaning the adjective fat, is not a dirty word unless people make it one by using it to convey fat negative attitudes or to be intentionally rude. Using the F word represents a linguistic reclamation
The F word.
from the pejorative use of the term. So fat as a word choice is straightforward, it's unapologetic, and those who use the term as a positive or neutral descriptor do not hide behind euphemisms like curvy, voluptuous, or heavy. They believe there's no reason to skirt around fatness. In so doing, they eschew the medicalized judgment of the O words, obesity or overweight, which pigeonhole fat bodies as deviant and
Hang on, we got Rottweiler here. Wouldn't overweight people be more bourgeois than skinny people, though? You could argue it's linked to consumerist capitalism, a consequence of it. Well, that's interesting, Rottweiler. And someone said this earlier in the chat. In the days of yore, fat people were considered the bourgeois because if you were fat, that meant you had a lot of extra food to eat. And so if you had extra food to eat, you probably had money and you weren't eating like, scraps or anything. You were eating like cakes and stuff like that, like the good stuff. And so like back in the day, fat people were the bourgeois and thin people were the proletariat. And now it's like flip-flopped because it doesn't really do them much good to say that skinny people are oppressed in society, I guess. I don't like fat studies is one of those things. Yes, exactly. Rubenesque. Exactly. That's where that came from. I don't really understand the if anyone has any insight into this, admittedly, I have not read the critical fat studies scholarship because I don't want to, but like I don't understand why they're making this big deal about like fat people being oppressed and rolling it into critical theory. Maybe I got to go back to James Lindsay's book on that and look that up.
necessitating remedy. Often members of US mainstream society indifferently use the O words, consider them to be acceptable or even politer than the F word, fat. But in the field of fat studies, there is consensus that the O words are neither neutral nor benign. When context demands using the O words, such as the so-called obesity epidemic or the body mass index category overweight, I use those terms within quote marks, as I like to put a critical distance between my field of fat studies and mainstream anti-fat discourse. So otherwise, I simply use the adjective fat as a value neutral
Well, they do. Hang on. Prometheus says, could that be could be that most fat people are from oppressed groups? They are going to link this into race, so you're going to see the intersectionality of it. So that is definitely a factor, Prometheus.
descriptor of people's bodies. Thus, the F word can be reclaimed to dispel prejudice, and its meaning can change over time when it's employed as a descriptor rather than a discriminator. Akin to other
That's a good
liberalizing
point, Laura.
voices, I seek to inspire positive cultural change by altering the context in which the F word is used. So jargon is kind of the mainstay of academia, but in this case, there is a simple three-letter adjective, fat, that the most progressive voices within size acceptance communities use to describe themselves. So in my presentation, I will discuss how body weight became medicalized as a sickness and its disastrous consequence. Fat people were ostracized for being fat. As fat prejudices grew, they merged with long-standing anti-Black and anti-brown prejudices,
There it is.
further marginalizing BIPOC communities. In 1998, the National Institutes of Health, influenced by guidelines put forth by the World Health Organization, reduced the cutoff between normal and overweight, renaming the latter pre-obesity, at a body mass index of 25. Formerly, the BMI was 28 for men, 27 for women. They assigned the BMI of 30 or greater to 3 subcategories of obesity. These recategorizations instantaneously rendered millions of, quote, normal weight Americans pre-obese, even though their body mass had not changed.
I will say this, where I do agree with the fat studies people is that BMI is bullshit. It just is. If you're really muscular, you're going to have a higher BMI, even if you're not fat. There are a lot of problems with the body mass index. I used to be able to recite them when I was more into working out. Yes, there was a time I was really into working out, but the BMI is bullshit. Don't pay attention to it, is my personal opinion.
This shift in BMI meant that the bar could be easily moved to ratchet up fat stigma around being overweight or obese. In contrast, normal weight or below became uncommon and prestigious, as fewer than 1/3 of American adults came in at a so-called normal weight. From 1991 to 2001, the New York Times published 751 articles on obesity, with over 40% of those articles printed after 1998. The Times articles put out during the former US Surgeon General C. Everett Koop's war on obesity did far more than reflect the existence of a biomedical epidemic. Rather, it became a war on fat and fat people themselves. In 2005, US Surgeon General Richard Carmona said, quote, "Obesity is the terror within, eroding our society, a burden we can't afford." Making these subliminal interconnections between the war on terror and the war on obesity in the post-9/11 US. Meanwhile, the media worked overtime to actively construct an epidemic discourse surrounding higher weight. By the 2000s, the term overweight went from being a judgmental adjective to a clinical term, and the American Medical Association voted to officially recognize obesity as a state of disease in 2013. This judgment was backed by several other powerful medical societies who sponsored a resolution to support medicalizing and pathologizing high body weight as a sickness. The NIH decision on BMI and its aftermath inflated a new population of medicalized people whose so-called condition now required treatment and regulation. anti-obesity public health campaigns, national physical education standards for K through 12 schools, and a media discourse perpetuating obesity as a crisis went on the attack. Several institutions from this point forward confirmed the new narrative. Fat people needed to be held responsible for their weight. Those who failed to address their body size should be subjected to surveillance, such as controlling weight in schools or instituting coercive, financially based workplace wellness programs focused on weight guidelines. Workplace wellness programs reinforced healthness and fat stigma.
Healthness.
To be a good employee, one had to participate in what amounted to dieting contests, and fellow employers who did not conform became subject to ostracization. Employers even threatened staff with financial forfeitures, such as foregone incentives, lost bonuses. In schools, obesity prevention programming resulted in weight-based bullying from peers, sometimes as well from teachers, driving student participants in such programs to psychological distress and disordered eating. Pairing the words obesity with epidemic became tautological. The endlessly iterated construction of obesity as a quasi-medical epidemic, just to make it so. Fat people got framed as irresponsible burdens
Healthness
on the
might
public
mean
purse strings
capitalism.
and a threat to the social good.
Ain't
Finger
it the
pointing began.
truth?
Overblown headlines in the media ensued. Sexist, elitist researchers with anti-fat prejudices claimed that working mothers were weak, ineffectual, and they were to blame for the childhood obesity crisis. Because the racial origins of fat phobia
Wait,
go back to the 19th.
did you just hear that? He said that what did he say? Like anti-fat people blame, like, okay, so basically he's saying that conservatives blamed working mothers on kids being fat. He said anti-fat people blamed working mothers on like childhood obesity. Look at this. And when you hear anti-fat, what they really mean is conservative. Now let's listen to what he just said.
Prejudices.
Oh, hang on. We'll go back a little
Classist,
more.
elitist researchers with anti-fat prejudices claimed that working mothers were weak, ineffectual, and they were to blame for the childhood obesity crisis.
Look at that. Anti-fat researchers blamed working mothers for the childhood obesity crisis. That is such a dig at conservatives. It's not even funny.
Because the racial origins of fat phobia go back to the 19th century, racially and ethnically minority.
Yo, I'm gonna say this. Some of that pizza you used to get back in the day at a school lunch, like, I don't know. I have a weird nostalgia about like pizza that they used to serve in school. I don't like I know intellectually it was really effing bad, but like there was also kind of like nothing better than the pizza that like pan pizza. It came in the square. It wasn't a pizza slice. It came in the square. That was some good effing pizza. I would eat that pizza any day.
Prioritized groups were especially targeted as lacking self-discipline. Public health campaigns against fatness condescendingly took aim at Black and Brown people, as if these populations were unaware of the war on obesity and needed state oversight of their bodies. Thus, the economically disenfranchised and racialized groups got singled out as inferior to middle class and above white Americans, positioned as having the so-called cultural value necessary to tame their bodies into slim or muscular submission. Indeed, the 1990s and beyond war on obesity converged with the 1960s war on poverty and America's war on immigrants to surveil one body, the fat, poor immigrant of color.
What?
Research foundations cropped up, such as Yale's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, Between 1990 and 2015, these foundations developed and endorsed assessment scales to measure anti-fat attitudes. It was unclear whether these scales quantify anti-fat attitudes or perpetuate problematic representations of fat people, or both. They appeared to assume a sizist mental set to condition an average person's response to the questionnaires. Two assumptions predominate the anti-fat assessment scales. The first, fatness can be individually controlled through choosing a healthy diet and exercise.
It can be.
If not, then fat shaming is deserved to motivate weight loss or to correct,
No, I wouldn't
quote,
say
one's
that.
poor lifestyle choices. And two, fat people are stigmatized others. Fat denotes a vague category, meaning weight represents a continuous variable.
So fat studies people assume that fat people are stigmatized, even if those fat people don't themselves feel stigmatized. It's no wonder. They literally assume that if you are of a certain size, you are automatically stigmatized and oppressed, even if you don't agree with that.
Variable. But most studies using these scales to measure the public's anti-fat attitudes fail to define what the researcher means by fatness. Neither do they ask the respondents their definition of what constitutes being fat. Moreover, such research rarely considers the respondent's own personal identity or physique when it comes to weight and body shape and size. This means that those responding to anti-fat measurement scales are likely to include fat people, having to rate their level of agreement with negative statements about fatness. This seems harmful given the research on exposure to negative stereotypes of one's social identity group leading to internalized oppression. All told, 7 themes emerged from Kane et al.'s analysis of these 7 scales. So theme 1, underlying the scale items, conveys fat people with impaired character, meaning respondents rate their level of agreement with supposed character flaws of fat people. In other words, the creators of these scales heavily emphasized character appraisal, wanting respondents to engage with items that represent fat people negatively. These scales do not allow respondents, some of whom are fat themselves, much opportunity to rate any positive beliefs that they may hold about fat people. Rather, all they can do is disagree with negative statements. Theme 2 that emerged from Kane et al.'s analysis of these scale items is that fat people are to be shunned, especially in employment and romantic relationships. Some scale items under the premise,
I don't know who needs to hear this, but there are a lot of fat people who are employed, and there are a lot of fat people who are in relationships. And some fat people are even employed and in a relationship at the same time.
Of this theme will ask respondents to gauge their level of agreement with the idea that a future fat self should be avoided, again, assuming that the respondents are not fat already. Theme 3, to come out of Kane et al.'s content analysis, was items that focused on fat people being considered disgusting and degradable. Such items also associated fat people with moral violations of sloth and gluttony, speaking to this religious dimension of fat shaming, in addition to the public health campaigns having recklessly used disgust as a tactic to motivate weight loss. Theme 4 in Kane et al.'s analysis revolves around scale items that describe fat people as out of control, reflecting the fat body as evidence of a lack of restraint or misbehavior that one is trying to pardon through excuse making. These scale items position fatness as a condition that requires explanation. So for example, that fatness results from food addiction or as the result of a genetic disease. Theme 5 focuses on fat people's appearance, with scale items in which emphasis is placed on rating and evaluating fat people's level of attractiveness or ugliness as it connects to anti-fat attitudes. Items entertain whether fat people should conceal their bodies in public or whether fat people are sexy. Interestingly, with these items, there is some room for the rater to engage with positive, neutral, and negative appraisals of fat people's appearance. Theme 6 in Kane et al.'s thematic coding of attitudes towards fat people scales, it is asking respondents to rate their level of agreement with whether fat people need protection from discrimination. Such items were not positive per se, rather they entertained the idea of whether fat people should have rights. Finally, theme 7 revolved around a small number of items asking respondents to rate if fat people are really all that different from non-fat people.
Can I tell you, I loved The Biggest Loser. This is a time when I was like, what? 15 years ago, 15, between like 10 and 15 years ago, I was really into working out 10 or 15 years ago. I was like one of those people, I would go to the gym all the time. I was training to run marathons, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll tell you what, like when I needed to do training runs on a treadmill, I would take my iPad or my iPhone, whichever, to the gym, put it on the treadmill, watch The Biggest Loser as I was like running 7, 8, 9, 10 miles on a treadmill or whatever the hell I was doing. Like it was those episodes of The Biggest Loser that got me through the extremely boring task of running 10 miles on a treadmill, because it was like, if they can run 10, if they can do what they're doing on that show, I can sit my ass here and run 10 miles on a treadmill and like get over the boredom, because I was like physically fit enough to do it, but it was just like the boredom would really get to me. And so I was like, The Biggest Loser, honestly, like watching that show at the gym was like one of the things that got me into like the best shape I was in of my life.
People, though very few measurements present fat people in equalizing terms. So in doing a close reading of anti-fat measurement scales, Kane et al. Argue that we need to rethink such measurements, which mostly quantify fat negativity. Measuring anti-fat attitudes in this way amounts to quantifying hypothetical beliefs or feelings and behaviors thought to link to stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination. Presumably, this is done to reduce weight-based stigma, meaning researchers develop scales to measure anti-fat attitudes and to establish in what areas these negative attitudes are most prevalent. Such studies may have the potential to develop strategies in those areas to persuade attitudinal change. But nevertheless, the scales overwhelmingly express fat negativity, with over half of the items emphasizing personal attributes or qualities presumed to be associated with fat people. Now, language differences occur between public health practitioners and fat studies scholars. Public health often uses the term weight bias, while fat studies uses the term fat stigma, referring to the negative associations and stereotypes or character traits that are associated with fatness experienced directly as discrimination. In some cases, myself and other fat studies scholars have used the term sizeism to liken anti-fat discrimination to other isms or forms of systemic oppression that result in structural level mistreatment of fat bodies.
It really is. It's like fat studies literally just took critical race theory and they replaced race with fat, and everything else stayed the same. It's like they're pretending that people are born fat when they're not born fat. They're pretending that like your weight isn't something that you have control over. They're pretending that all of society was just built up to keep fat people oppressed, which, you know, I will throw them a bone and say there are some things that are like inconvenient when you reach certain weights. I think like flying on a plane would be one of them, but to be honest, like what do you really want airlines to do? Like, I'm sorry that you can't fit into a seat. I genuinely am. That must really suck. I feel for you. I'm not even playing. Like, that must really suck. And I'm sure it's really embarrassing for very large people to fly on a plane and not be able to fit into a seat. I get it. But Like, what do you want them to do? Like, I mean, I guess like make every seat first class. I would be in favor of that. I wouldn't have a problem with it. But to pretend that all of society is built to just like keep fat people down and like your weight isn't something that you have control over, I mean, it just seems a little disingenuous.
To use terms like weight discrimination, stemming from weight bias, is debatable, given that, as von Liebenstein notes, many victims of weight discrimination are by no means discriminated against because of their weight, but because they are fat. The problem then seems to be not so much about a certain number on the scale, but visible body fat as a mark of disgrace that gets associated with a physique considered to be out of bounds. Legal definitions of weight discrimination consider it a form of indirect discrimination, meaning a situation in which fat people are treated in an unfair way because of a more general social inequality such as ageism, sexism, looksism, or ableism. Legal arguments trend toward the idea that a person is not fired because they are fat per se, but because they required a roomier desk or a larger uniform.
No,
meaning
that's
their
not
employer
real.
denied them reasonable accommodations.
I have quite literally never seen that happen in the workplace before, where someone was fired because they needed a bigger desk. Like, in most workplaces, it wouldn't even be the desk that would be the problem, maybe the chair, but, like, no workplace is gonna fire someone over a chair. That doesn't happen. Or a uniform. It just doesn't happen.
And thus ableism occurred. Another example would be airlines refusing to accommodate fat flyers and charging them for 2 seats on a plane. Likewise, one is passed over for hiring or fired, not because they are fat, but rather mistreated or discriminated against because of the way they look. Essentially because they are considered quote unquote ugly, a visual injustice has occurred. Though primarily it gets attributed to a manifestation of racism or sexism or ageism and so on. To elaborate, weight discrimination is often subsumed under disability discrimination. And at times this can be connected to the medical community associating BMI with impairment, and therefore this kind of faint possibility of employing the American with Disabilities Act to address these discrimination claims made by fat people. More likely, fat plaintiffs might turn to the social model of disability, demonstrating that social environments are constructed with thinner or so-called average people in mind, which disables fat people's access to full and effective participation in society. This is to say that the category—
How? How can fat people not participate in society? Like, that doesn't even make any— what can't fat people do in society? Fat people can go to the store and buy food. Fat people can go to the mall. Fat people can go out to a restaurant. Fat people can go to an amusement park. Fat people can still do they can't do all roller coasters. There's going to be weight limits on some of them because, like, it's a thing. But, like, they can go to an amusement park. They can ride the Ferris wheel. Like, what can't fat people do? They can go swimming. They can go cave exploring. They can— I mean, I wasn't like, okay, I wasn't fat when I ran my last marathon, but I wasn't I know I was on the same marathon team as a guy from The Biggest Loser. So no, that's not even true. Fat people can absolutely run a marathon. I know that because the last time I ran a marathon, I was on the Dana-Farber Boston Marathon team with a guy who was on The Biggest Loser, and he did the whole damn marathon. So that's not true. There's nothing of significance that fat people can't do in society. I'm sorry. That's just a lie.
of disability or the disability rights model has been useful to force awareness of the stigma or abuses that fat people suffer in the West. Nevertheless, progressive fat people do not necessarily think of their bodies as quote unquote impaired, and they would certainly rail against their personhood or bodies being medically fixated upon as, quote, excessively having a body fat condition, even as they may yearn for compassionate and competent fat-friendly medical care. Some states, counties, municipalities in the United States have passed laws banning discrimination, particularly in employment based on a person's physical appearance and personal appearance, respectively. Likewise, modest federal precedent was set by flight attendant case law, focusing on gender-based double standards when it came to appearance policies for female flight attendants, which included weight specifications. This is to say that when it comes to physical features and bodily characteristics, weight discrimination, specifically discrimination towards fat individuals, is often subsumed under legislation focused on appearance-based discrimination. Nevertheless, some jurisdictions argue high weight is not an immutable property, but rather subject to individual control.
It's not an immutable
and therefore
property.
Unworthy of anti-discrimination protections. In other words, there is ample reason to argue for working to end weight discrimination, separate from weight-based appearance discrimination. Thin people, too, can be considered ugly, but the issue is that oftentimes fat people are thought to have grown to a state of unsightly size because they have supposed moral shortcomings. The problem is that each ism is rooted by its own discriminatory logic. Therefore, to protect fat people from discrimination, fat activists and fat studies scholars must insist on articulating the logics of anti-fat discrimination in and of itself. The dominant narrative is that high weight, aka observable fatness, results from negative character traits.
High weight is observable fatness.
Such as laziness, greediness, self-indulgence, and blameworthiness for making poor lifestyle choices. When compared to the discrimination category race, weight reveals a reverse discriminatory logic. Being a Black or brown race, according to racist logic, makes you prone to having a moral flaw, vice, or social deviancy. But having a moral flaw, according to fattist logic, makes you prone to be fat. Therefore, fattist logic takes stigmatizing fatness to be a warranted response to the morally blameworthy failure to slim down exhibited by fat persons. So how else then are we to conceptualize weight-based discrimination? Weight can be mutable or practically immutable and difficult to permanently change. Given this uncertainty, demanding fatness be protected under anti-discrimination law that protects immutable characteristics does not seem to be a viable direction.
Exactly. Thank you.
Another direction taken has been to go the route of framing stigma as a public health issue. Then again, this often results in people using healthist discourses to deny one the right to be fat, or the supposed health.
So now we have fatist and healthist. You learn new words every day.
Of being fat gets exaggerated for the economic interests of the multi-billion-dollar weight loss drug, fad diet, exercise, and surgical weight loss industries. Nevertheless, public health discourse recognizes the negative role of stigma on one's health. In the last 20 years, public health acknowledged that weight stigma and bias undermine one's quality of life, even as it's still ascribed to this anti-obesity framework. So on one hand, public health discourse came to acknowledge that weight stigma can cause fat people to avoid healthcare or sites for pleasurable activity. But in the same breath, public health departments often create anti-obesity campaigns that appeal to eliciting disgust around fat bodies. Or public health practitioners at times claim that quote unquote political correctness recklessly glamorizes obesity. Then they draw parallels to stigmatizing being permitted in anti-smoking campaigns. And though beyond the scope of this talk, there's a whole literature that questions whether shaming smokers helps them.
Whoa,
Fatness-
Beth, thank you for the super chat. I really do appreciate it. Beth says, I can speak from experience. When we worked at Disney World, the costumes for women only went up to a 16. If you were larger, you had to work behind the scenes. Men went up to 40. Only if you were a special character would they make an exception. Well, I mean, I think that's a really good point, Beth, and that's an exception to me. I guess I would say that, like, it seems in those cases we're talking about like specialty costumes. I mean, I'm not saying it was right or anything, but there was other like work available. It did sound like, but I mean, point well taken. I mean, they should, and I suspect that Disney has probably expanded this since then, because Disney has now men dressing up in dresses and pretending to be fairy godmothers. So I suspect that may have changed, but fair point well made, Beth. Thank you for the super chat again.
Fatness and health are not a straightforward connection, nor is fatness reducible to a singular behavior like smoking, as even the CDC acknowledges that, quote, many factors can contribute to high weight, including eating patterns, physical activity levels, sleep routines, social determinants of health, genetics, taking certain medications, and so on. Then there's the literature debating the obesity paradox, representing one of the many examples of conflicting evidence that fatness leads to worse health outcomes across the board as compared to thin or normal weight. There is extant evidence showing that so-called obesity in older adults or patients with some severe chronic disease may be protective and associated with decreased mortality. Fat activism and its offshoot, Fat Studies, addresses healthism among many other issues. Healthism refers to a system of beliefs that considers health to be the primary responsibility of an individual. It ignores the impact of social problems like poverty, oppression, war, violence, historical atrocities, abuses, environmental injustice on people's well-being. Healthism places moral importance on maintaining good health, and it ranks the personal pursuit of health above all other activities.
Well, why can't individuals place moral importance on good health? Like, some people are going to do that and some people aren't, but like, why are we shaming people for saying, you know what? I think that I would like to be, physically healthy. Why is that if it's fine for people to be fat, why isn't it fine for people to not be fat?
Framing a moral obligation to be fit and healthy can have negative consequences. For example, it can lead to issues like a difficult relationship with food, eating problems, negative body image. Likewise, in the words of Lindy West, quote, it is easier to mock and deride individual fat people than to fix food deserts. Fat activists and fat studies scholars know all too well that in a fat-hating society, anti-fat shamers will feign concern for a fat person's health as their most voiced objection to fatness. Being high and mighty, those who dislike fat bodies will lean on the question, but what about your health? Fat Studies takes a critical approach to the medicalized understanding of ample bodies. It explores the lived experience of fatness, which includes fat stigma or negative attitudes held towards fat people, leading to their mistreatment. At the same time, the fat rights movement sought to disrupt the overdetermined connection between fatness and health, akin to the embodied resistance of the disability rights movement. As Charlotte Cooper writes, quote, fat activism is not just a matter of health, beauty, or seeking rights. Sometimes social justice or fat activism is included within the health at every size model, but this activist angle cannot be assumed. Plus, today, health at every size has been adopted by some health practitioners, but part of that process has been its professionalization. This means that it's no longer a grassroots affair, as it once was when health at every size was carried out by fat activists rejecting BMI as a proxy for health. Now, by health at every size, Cooper is referring to a model that pits well-being against that weight-centered health paradigm. Today, this model is often associated with nutritionist Lindo Bacon, credentialed in physiology and psychology and exercise metabolism, and psychologist and eating disorder specialist Deb Burgard. It begins with a simple premise that size acceptance can enhance your well-being, or that finding joy in movement without the focus being on some ideal weight is important. It values fat people's own knowledge of their bodies, intuitive eating, and it names fat injustice as the real health harm. Some scholars and practitioners in community health, student health services, nutrition, and dietetics, just to name a few areas, have taken
It does sound like a made-up name. It does. Oh, why did the video stop?
to give up the entrenched practice of pathologizing fatness and health. Still, some fat activists critique health at every size by arguing it perpetuates healthism. Still others express discomfort with the celebration of health at every size happening within body positive spaces. As health at every size in some cases became legitimized by health professionals or co-opted by the body positivity movement, it resulted in an expectation that fat people they must do so to proclaim their innocence and to receive, quote, tolerance, both when seeking healthcare and from the wider society. A good fatty must do everything they can to take care of themselves and therefore can be forgiven for their fat body.
A good fatty? They're saying that is like a positive thing to call someone a good fatty?
Meanwhile, as Gemma Gibson writes, quote, bad fatties are fat people who do not work hard. They are often presented as a caricature in mainstream media, as a grotesque figure who does not exercise
and you're saying
and
a good
eats to
fatty
excess,
is not a character?
That bifurcation results in dividing fat people up into two categories and suggests that one group deserves to be treated better than the other group. But rather, as Reagan Chastain writes, fat people—
I just want to remind everyone again, this is an assistant professor at a state-funded university speaking to a private college in Massachusetts that probably costs at least $60,000 a year to go through, and they're calling fat people good and bad fatty.
will have the right to exist in fat bodies.
Beth, how would you feel about being called a good fatty? Or a bad fatty, I guess, but like, that's one of the most demeaning things I've ever heard in my life.
Without shame, without stigma, bullying, or oppression. It doesn't matter why they're fat. Basic civil rights are non-negotiable. Regardless of a fat person's health, ability, or habits, fat people should be treated with respect.
I'm not sure calling them a good and bad fatty is treating them with respect.
I wanted to briefly comment on research potentially relevant to this audience's pedagogy and practice. Jennifer Brady, director of the School of Nutrition and Dietetics at Acadia University, and Meredith Bessie, a registered dietitian and doctoral student in applied nutrition, they conducted interviews with self-identified fat dietetic students in either an undergraduate or graduate dietetics training program in Canada. Drawing upon the theoretical framework of bio or disciplinary power as proposed by Michel Foucault, the authors used these interviews to analyze how the students felt compelled to self-monitor. The research aimed to answer the questions of, what do we make of a fat dietetics student? Is she considered a virtuous health professional whose corporeal self fits the norms of her profession? The authors explored the concept of biopedagogies. Biopedagogies refers to the formal and informal education that works to socialize people into regulating and normalizing their bodies to be virtuous and responsible citizens. So the authors sought to understand the position of the fat dietetic student, both as the object of the health profession's gaze, and as the subject who will become licensed to quote unquote save people from obesity. As part of professional socialization, dietetic student practice often includes collecting anthropometric measurements on themselves and fellow students. This experience can be emotionally challenging, especially when done in front of faculty and peers. One participant in the study observed witnessing some of her peers crying during this assignment, and it provided her with a better understanding of how a client could feel during routine weigh-ins at the doctor's office or during regular weigh-ins with a registered dietitian nutritionist, or perhaps when schools force students to weigh publicly in gym class. Furthermore, this class exercise among highly competitive groups of mostly women, given that most dietitians are women, can corporealize fat oppression. It sends an unspoken message that being a fat woman is not acceptable. These unacknowledged lessons have a negative impact on a dietetic student's educational experience. The hidden curriculum of shaming at the scale occurs despite the standards of nutrition and dietetic professional practice.
Hang on, I got a super chat from Rottweiler. Rottweiler says, of course they had to invoke Foucault and his imprisonment theory of being, in which we're trapped in bodies we don't want. Postmodernism is cancer. What else does Foucault apply to? This should be a gimme for you guys. Like, what else does Foucault's imprisonment theory of being apply to? And I'm going to give you a hint. This professor that we're seeing do this fat studies presentation also lectures in queer theory. He's also a queer theorist, which is why he's invoking Foucault in the first place. Trans, indeed. Trans. Exactly. It could also apply. Rottweiler is correct. Rottweiler, I am not even broaching the topic of age of consent. You are setting me up to get a clip taken out of context that will be used against me at some point. I am not discussing age of consent.
That include the explicit message that weight is, quote, not a measure of worth, ability, nor overall health. The fat dietetic students interviewed tacitly had accepted the importance of physical appearance in their profession, understanding that a dietitian should be thin, but not too thin. Additionally, those students in the programs were mainly white, female, and middle class. Fat international dietetic students encountered negative perceptions toward their fatness, which had a racialized component. And finally, the interviewees perceived that being fat could have a negative impact on their professional authority as dietitians. Similarly, Corey Wren explored how the veganism campaign and its fat-shaming rhetoric and ideologies of thin privilege can lead to weight-based discrimination in vegan circles.
Vegans are fat-phobic now? Well, that makes sense. They want everyone to eat bugs. So, of course, vegans would be fat-phobic.
With a survey of 61 fat-identified vegans, mostly women, Wren found that 1 in 4 had experienced such discrimination. According to Wren, fat vegans erroneously symbolize either veganism done wrong or proof that veganism is unhealthy. This highlights an intersectional failure in veganism as it fails to address body politics and vegan thinspiration. Rather than pit animal-loving vegans against fat people, vegan anti-fat bias needs to stop. And parallels can be drawn between animals and fat people. Both have been subjected to inhumane cruelty and exploitation, their bodies butchered in slaughterhouses and weight loss surgery centers.
He just basically said that fat people are animals. I just want to take a minute with that. He literally just said that parallels can be drawn between fat people and animals.
To close, fat studies and fat activism have become a powerful counter-hegemonic voice. In recent years, these fields have examined the health sciences data on obesity as a discourse that can be understood in connection with other relevant discourses, affording an alternative reconfiguration of talk surrounding body shape and size. Nevertheless, fat studies and fat activism is not just an investment in an alternative biomedical discourse, but more importantly, a rights-based movement. For activists who have been a part of fat liberation communities for years or for decades, the seemingly perpetual work of having to address the foundational questions about the right to be fat, how people get fat, how convincing others that being fat is legitimate, it can be exhausting or frustrating and demoralizing. Many want to go beyond these basic conversations so they can think deeply about fat lives and fat politics on their own terms, and then put pressure on the systems of power that keep fat oppression in place. All told, fat activists and fat studies scholars are all too aware that researchers claiming to study weight stigma often do not hold the perspective of positioning fatness as simply bodily variation or a form of human diversity. Instead, many of these researchers think weight stigma is counterproductive to encouraging fat people to lose weight through diet and exercise. Therefore, the difficult work of fat activists and scholars is to reconfigure the narrative to demonstrate that weight stigma tramples on fat people's rights or contributes to their poor mental health outcomes. Weight stigma research must move away from quantifying fat negativity and provide avenues for a range of opinions to be expressed about fatness. And we need to push researchers to question their own starting assumptions. Very few locales in the United States and abroad have codified into law any protections against using weight as a grounds for discrimination. Only the state of Michigan and a handful of cities such as San Francisco and Santa Cruz, California, Madison, Wisconsin, Binghamton, New York, Urbana, Illinois, and Washington, D.C. ban discrimination based
All
on
the
weight.
most woke cities in the world.
The bottom line is that fat people have the right to be spared preachy weight loss sermons when they go to the doctor for cold symptoms, or they have the right not to be subjected to public health marketing campaigns or Hollywood's fat suit films that target fat people as miserable candidates for weight loss. People should have the right to diverse bodies, including in terms of body shape and size, and no one should be subjected to character or body bashing forces determined to damage your relationship with your body, or in this case, that impede upon a fat person's agency to be a part of society, treating fat people like second-class citizens. Thus, when it comes to addressing weight discrimination or anti-fat stigma, at stake is the right to be fat. Rather than accept those people who are thin or muscular only, we must respect and embrace people of all weights, shapes, and sizes. One final note, the goal of fat activism cannot be reduced to anti-stigma work alone. Fat activism and fat studies benefits from a multifaceted nature. Thank you. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Oh, I'm anxious to find out what questions he's
Thank you
going to
so
answer.
much, Dr. Wilson. You raise up a very important issue. I'm also doing research on obesity, and but you let me really enlighten me. Like you address the issue from a different angle. I think it's very, very nice.
Thank you.
An important topic, and thank you so much. And now the floor is open. We have a couple minutes for questions. Yeah, we can have a round of virtual climb, right? Cloud or whatever.
Oh, look, that guy did spirit fingers. He did spirit
Yeah,
fingers.
go ahead, Irene. You have a question?
Sure, I'm happy to kick us off. I think there's already someone in the chat.
Yeah, it's Will Master.
Will, do you want us to read it? Just unmute if you would like to read your own question.
Sure, yeah, Jason, I was just really curious about your ethnography within the gay community.
Sure.
Of course, your broader cultural point is very clear, and I think I hope it resonates well within the Friedman community here. It's something that we certainly wrestle with a great deal. Given your specific expertise, though, I'm just curious about your sense of the trajectory since your book.
Sure.
And in particular, just within the gay community, right? So, we're in Boston, so people are pretty familiar that a peak week of Provincetown tourism is devoted to this event that really celebrates, I think, but from an outsider, it's hard to know. And I'm curious if your ethnography kind of can share some insights about that.
He's not an ethnographer.
Sure. So yeah, I saw in the chat the word bear,
He's not an ethnographer.
Right? I think
that's not what it is.
In my own work on Girth and Mirth,
well, I guess
Girth and
if it's
Mirth
just like
was the
gay men
original
in general,
social movement, and then the bear group is a spin-off of Girth and Mirth because in many ways it was easier to market hirsuteness or hairiness, and this kind of lumberjack drag, if you will, the flannel shirt and jeans. That kind of idea was easier to market. And so the bears were pretty successful in marketing themselves. But one thing that I think happened over time is bears often were people of ample size as well. And there has been a kind of downplaying of fatness in a way that doesn't occur in girth and mirth. So, for example, there has been a lot of discussion about people lamenting the rise of the muscle bear, right? That there are kinds of bears that get privileged within that community. And again, a bulk male in that community might be muscular rather than fat, for example. So I think even within group, there can be discrimination. In terms of shifting the narrative, I think that it's been a long road. I think that within the gay community, fat shaming is still quite prevalent, whether it's people putting on their profiles, no fats, no femmes, no blacks, no Asians. So you see that there's fat shaming, femme phobia, and also, racist comments.
Well,
that are being
or maybe
outright
they
made
just have a type
within,
that they want, and
dating
they're allowed to
applications,
have a
for
type
example.
that they want.
So I don't think that fat shaming has disappeared. I do think that my book work, one of the things that I would seek to correct is that I think I was part of a vanguard of folks that really made the topic in fat studies to be this kind of anti-stigma work. And in my book, there's all kinds of material about the kind of performative ways these men react to sizeism. So they are going through a pride parade.
Autumn, if you keep using alt accounts, I'm banning your main account. I am no longer screwing around. Stop fucking around in my chat. I am so sick of it. You are going to get banned if you don't cut the bullshit, Autumn. I swear to God. Milo, thank you for the super chat. Karl Marx wrote the most successful diet book in all of world history, responsible for more weight loss than anything else ever written. Indeed he did, Milo. Indeed he did. Thank you for the insight. All right, guys, we are wrapping up. We've got about 10 minutes left of this presentation. If Autumn might be banned by the end of this presentation. I know a lot of you have been wanting me to ban Autumn lately. Today might actually be the day.
In a larger than life bathtub blowing bubbles, and it's called Rub-a-Dub-Dub, Big Men in a Tub, right? And it's a campy queer performance. Using a child's rhyme that's also kind of funny about 3 men in a tub, being both gay and campy. And so I think that for me, I was really interested in the ways that people reconfigure the shame of fat stigma. But I think that my work and others really kind of cemented that fat studies or fat activism is anti-stigma work. And I think it's much, much more than that, right? Fat people are producers of art. Fat people are producers of literature. So I think that sometimes
he talks about this like this is like going to be a surprise to some people. He's like, guys, fat people are people too. I know. I didn't know they were people before I got my PhD, but I promise you, fat people are. It's like they come to this with like such a state of shock. Like, did you guys know that fat people can make art and literature and music and they can have jobs? And guys, sometimes fat people like sex, and sometimes fat people can even be in a relationship. I know, I was surprised too before I got a PhD.
Sometimes that gets lost. And so I've done a lot of work recently on bear art, bear media, fat gay men's art exhibits, these kinds of things. So I think that I want to be clear, it's not just anti-stigma work alone.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Will, for the question. Irene, maybe we can ask Dr. Solomon
fat people can cook too.
Ask the question first.
Thank you. I wonder how you would address another coalition of scholarship and activism in terms of the healthy eating movement, which basically has the notion or promotes that commercialization of food, the processing of food, is actually intentionally producing an addiction to a higher caloric and pleasure dependency, because one would think that it could be considered an ally of those who would seek the freedom, the liberation to have whatever body weight. So is there been any observations on these two kinds of coalitions?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Rudd Center, and since then the Rudd Center's moved to Yukon, and it's swapped out the word obesity for another word. But I think that, you know, there was a time in which that center was heavily focused on the tax on caloric soda, for example. And what happened is it got called a fat tax. And I think the issue became, you know, there could be this idea that everyone should have access to healthy food, to good food. But that can be done without fat shaming. And I think that sometimes what has happened is, in the name of health, fat shaming occurs. And so I guess I use that word healthism, you know, more often to address that. So I think that certainly you can have support for healthy eating. I guess part of what I was trying to address with the fat vegan example is that there are many fat vegans. I have many friends in my fat studies circles who are fat vegans. But within that world, there has also been campaigns that have posters of a fat woman in a bathing suit, and it's focused on her back. And it says, you know, do away with the meat, do away with the blubber, right? Or there have been other examples of that. And so I think that there are ways that there can be access to good food, or fat people could be vegans without having the fat shaming aspect of it. It's in many ways something that we think of in other areas. You know, we can have access to fun and sports, but we don't have to have racist mascots in sports, right? So I think that, you know, those two things can happen at the same time. But oftentimes I think these have become, you know, an attack on fat people sometimes. But I don't think that the two are incompatible, I guess.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one short questions. Or maybe Irene, you can go ahead, ask your question.
Sure. Might not be short. I come from outside this world. I'm a climate scientist by training. So this has been very interesting for me. I've learned a lot. I guess one question I would have is, do you have thoughts or advice, or maybe even good examples of how the health community can talk about health effects of eating, or maybe associations between certain, I don't know, can talk about health in a way that doesn't create stigma? This is sort of my question. What would be your advice for people working on health research? And that obviously might relate to weight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, the health at every size model was kind of addressing that. And then unfortunately, I think as it became co-opted, it also became kind of an indictment that you had to be the good fatty in terms of health behavior. But I do think that there are ways. For instance, it can be as simple as if somebody shows up for a medical appointment for a cold, not giving them a preachy weight loss sermon. You know, if somebody seeks medical care for, I don't know, maybe they broke their knee, and then the first thing out of your mouth is, well, my table's not big enough to accommodate you for knee surgery. You know, I think that there are ways in which that public health sometimes, all it can see is this master status of fat. It becomes the overriding category that in sociological terms becomes all that someone can see about someone. And so part of it is also, I think, a more holistic approach, if you will. I also think to be aware of healthism. You know, it has detrimental effects. When Eric Garner was executed by the police, there were I wrote an article about this. Several officers went online to support Daniel Pantaleo, that was the killer of Eric Garner. And they all said, well, you know, it was his fault. He would have died going up a flight of stairs because he was fat. His family should be suing Pizza Hut. His family should be suing, you know, Taco Bell. And that really speaks to this idea that, you know, somehow people dogpiling on top of someone, choking someone, you know, they're using fat stigma to sidestep police brutality, to sidestep racism, right? They also used healthism. He was asthmatic. He had a heart condition. And so again, they kind of blamed that he was a ticking time bomb or a walking heart attack. So I think it's also to be aware that sizeism, when I say sizeism at the structural level, it has effects, and we need to be aware of that. On a personal level, I try not to engage in fat talk. So if I run into a conversation and everyone's saying, I'm fat, yeah, I try to get out of that conversation and not engage in that. It doesn't mean that we need to recognize differences. I'm not going to, if somebody identifies as a fat woman, I'm not going to say, no, you're not fat, right? Because that in ways is not, it's distorting differences. There are differences between us, but it's simple bodily diversity, I think, in that sense. I also flip the script sometimes with students. I have a Yay scale, and it's something that Marilyn Wana, an activist, created that is a scale that gives out compliments and not numbers, So to get you to understand that these things are somewhat socially constructed as well, we could do this in a different way. But that's more of an undergraduate teaching pedagogy, I guess.
Great, thank you.
Great.
That's
Great.
excellent.
I'm sure there are many other questions, and also it worth more time to discuss these very important issues. However, I know many students will have class, and the faculty also need to teach. So we have to stop here. But before we leave, just remind everyone, after a spring break, our Wednesday session will be in person. So welcome to join us in the auditorium. And certainly the Zoom link will be available. And thank you so much, Dr. Wilson, for the very nice and enlightening talks. Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you all.
That is our fat studies presentation for today. Now, I'm going to say this. That is not remotely the craziest fat studies presentation I've ever seen. In fact, that was probably the tamest fat studies presentation I've ever seen. But we still learned lots of new things. We learned that fat people are poor oppressed victims of society, and there's nothing that they can do to ever get out of being poor oppressed victims of society. We learned about words like fattest and healthist, not fat EST, fat IST, which apparently is well a little bit different. We learned that fat people don't have the ability to control their own weight. We've learned that vegans also oppress fat people, because vegans definitely are probably even worse than carnivores, if we're honest about it. We learned a lot of stuff today on the show, and I'm it's always an interesting ride when you go into the fat studies arena, especially when I think the most important thing for me that I learned today that I hadn't really solidified in my head yet is that fat studies is inextricably linked with queer theory, because the guy that was doing the fat studies presentation was also a queer theorist. And so because we know that fat studies is linked with queer theory, then we can assume that it's all going to lead back to like abolition of the nuclear family and abolition of the gender binary eventually. Also, you could say there's something about queering weight, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot to unpack. But guys, that is all we have for happy hour today. A little bit of a shorter episode than normal, but I only had one beer. But it did taste like melted strawberry ice cream, and it was delicious, and it was 6% alcohol. So I'm already a little bit tipsy. So it's probably time for me to get off the internet. Now, quick programming note. Tomorrow, we're doing Socialism Saturday. Per usual, Socialism Saturday starts at 6 p.m. on Saturday. On Sunday at 8 p.m., we are and I don't know what we're watching yet. I'm going to find a great thing for Socialism Saturday. On Sunday, we're doing movie night in the supporter Discord at 8 p.m. But I just want to let everyone know, next Friday and Saturday, I am taking next Friday and Saturday off, because I have other things I need to do. So we are not going to have happy hour next week. We will have Socialism Saturday this week, but we will not have Socialism Saturday next week. And so I just want to give everyone the heads up on that. That's going to be happening. I don't want anyone to be surprised. I promise it is for a very, very, very good reason. But that's all I have for right now, guys. Please make sure you mount that like button on the way out the door. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already. And thank you for watching on Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, on my other platforms as well. Guys, that's all we have for tonight. I will see you at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you soon. Bye.